Hello, my name is Junie. Been at Jenkins World before. But first, can you confirm if you can hear me okay? Cool. So I have a consulting firm, Continuity. I partner with enterprises to... Okay. Okay. So it's always good to wake everybody up, so that's fine. And this is literally the last talk of the conference, so we made it. Better now? Okay. Good? All right. Okay, so my website is continuity.world. If you folks get a chance to come by my website, the many things I hope you can find useful. This has nothing to do with this particular talk, but just DevOps, continuous delivery in general. I'm also writing my second book. It should be out in a month or two. You get the teasers and all the diagrams already available on the website. And the topic that I'll be addressing is actually a chapter in that book. I obviously won't be going through so much detail in a presentation, but I still want to bring to you the meat of it because I know this is a very controversial topic. Just writing a chapter isn't the best way to do this, so maybe sometimes we have to just come to a session like this and talk it out. And if you have a question, you don't necessarily have to wait till the end. I'm having a little bit of difficulty in seeing because of the lights. Just yell, and I'll stop, and you can just have an open conversation. So before we dive into tech, I want to make sure that we understand what separation of duties really means, and I want you to understand with an exact example. So the US government has 3 branches, and it's there for a reason. The way this was designed is so that no one group can have complete control. And those branches are judicial, executive, legislative, as we all know. So it creates a separation of powers. It enforces checks and balances. It, like I said, prevents one group from having too much control. But most importantly, it prevents the government from violating the rights of Americans. So separation of duties isn't new, isn't necessarily native to continuous delivery or anything like that. It is what we need to do when we have to do the right thing. So let's take quick examples. And whether you watch too much Netflix, House of Cards like I do, or whether you are following the news, the real life as we know it right now, it doesn't really matter. But if the president, who is the head of the executive branch, signs a questionable treaty, the Senate, who's part of the legislative branch, can block it. Another example, if the Congress, who is part of the legislative branch, passes an unconstitutional law, God forbid, but then if they really do, the US Supreme Court, who's part of the judicial branch, can block it. So you kind of get the idea. It means why it's divided into 3 branches. So what I'll do is I'll first extract the essence out of it. So what is it that we are really trying to do? There are really 4 things we are trying to do. It's the concept of having more than one person or group required to complete one task. So if I complete all the tasks just by myself, I do not create that separation. I may not be malicious, but it's still not the right thing to do. A separation of powers is needed for unbiased governance. We saw that. We will discuss this in a little more detail, an internal control intended to prevent fraud and/or error. So whether it's an inadvertent error or malicious error, it doesn't matter. The fact that we have to prevent it is obvious. And we have to disseminate tasks and associate privileges from business processes. Now, all the enterprises I've worked for or consulted for do not have proper documentation that they can share saying this is our interpretation of SOD, like separation of duties or segregation of duties. So what we should do really when we do continuous delivery is fall back on this documentation, this is not what I invented. This is what we follow as a country, as a government, and then this is what is the essence if you look at Wikipedia or any other documentation. So what we'll do is we'll just honor this, right? And we won't listen to things like, oh, InfoSec will not approve it, or risk would not approve it, or governance would not approve it. So we don't want to know who would not approve it. What we want to know is what's wrong with this definition. So one by one, right? We roll the dice. The first one, the concept of having more than one person required to complete a task. Now, I know I first did politics and now I'm going to do geometry. So it's essentially just, the essence is if you had 3 parties like we saw in the governance, you could have different weights to each party. So in this particular diagram, you see that the weights of each side could be different. Just hold that thought. It's not necessary. We don't have to have that. They could have equal weights, like the equilateral triangle where everybody is 60 degrees, so they all have equal weight. But the most important thing is whether they have equal weights or not, the center of gravity is going to be within that structure. So what it means is, without giving too much power to this person or this person or this person, the power is somewhere in the middle. And that is what we really need here. We don't want to give the whole control to someone. If you are in the stock market, the ETFs and etc., you would have heard this term. Like wherever you go, like in a finance webinar or something, you would have heard of diversified and balanced portfolio. You do this so that, if you invest all into tech or all stocks into real estate, you could lose a lot of money. So they ask you to diversify your portfolio by certain, 35% of that, 20% of that. So this is also a concept which adds to this, the whole separation of duties topic. Now we look at something called an index. And this index is also, borrowing that same concept from the stock market. You have an index fund, they say, and then that index fund, if you, tease it apart, you see the different kinds of funds that are actually inside that index fund. If we were to define a stability index for our enterprise, which is, by the way, if you talk to anyone in the C-suite, like you talk to the CIO or CTO or CPO or CISO, it doesn't matter. What really they want to know is, are we stable? Are we in a state of stability? But the fun part is if you ask them to define what stable means to you, if you go and ask different C-suite people in different enterprises, they will each give you a different definition of stability, what stability means to them. That's not necessarily a bad thing. They have their own perspectives. They're running different kinds of businesses. Okay, so see, an important note, there are not many women speakers. I think I'm digressing a little bit, who actually wear pendants, which can potentially scratch with your microphone. So now we are running into different kinds of problems here. So that's good, it's a good thing for me. So the optionally weighted, why is it optional? Because you don't necessarily have to have a weight. Like we said, all parties could have the same weight. If stability were to be defined as number of escaped defects. So if you ask people on the QA, operations, and InfoSec side, what does stability mean? If your pipeline was there and it couldn't catch the defects escaped your pipeline, we are unstable. And it's a very good definition because it's life for them. If you had a pipeline, if you had all the necessary coverage, if you did automate everything, how come we ended up with escape defects? So yes, then we are unstable. So I agree. If you ask somebody in dev product, it's my check-in to go live, which Jez Humble, he refers to as lead time. Like, how long does it take for me if I have a bug, how fast can I fix it? If I have to push a new feature, how fast can I release it? So it's the check-in, how long does it take for a check-in to go live? So stability means that to some people. And however, if you talk to somebody outside of engineering, business side, the marketing side, they're like, well, how does it even matter if you're releasing in hours or minutes or seconds for that matter? I don't get repeat customers. Customers don't come back and sign with us, which means we are doing something wrong. Like it's all these perspectives are important, but if you mix them up into one index, and that's what stability means to you, you've kind of factored in everybody's concerns, and that's what is very, very important. So this is one thought, right? This is one way of saying I involve everybody into making that decision. And yes, we could have many sides to this. Like, we don't necessarily have to have just 3 sides. You could have any number of sides, and we see one such thing, which is actually a very important factor in the continuous delivery pipeline. In fact, it's the first gate, if I may say so. The first gate, when you're very close to source code, people have to say, what is my code quality? And then again, I come back to the $1 million question. What do you mean by code quality? What does quality of code mean to you? Okay, could mean cyclomatic complexity, like how many times have I done if else, if else, if else, and people cannot even code review or code anymore, right? There's just way too many paths, which also makes it hard to test, because you never know which code path you are now missing out on, and it's going to be very intensive to make sure that you have good coverage. It could mean code duplication. In one team, it wasn't intentional. There was so much pressure on deadlines. People did so much copy pasting that the first thing we really needed to do after that is refactor. Like we didn't do the right thing. But there was some pressure, so there was a lot of copy paste, and we had to come back and clean it. But the code duplication metric went up, it was pretty bad. Unit test coverage, I think there is more or less agreement. However, I completely disagree with the approach that we should have a goal of 100%, because it doesn't necessarily mean anything. Even if you have 100% code coverage, you could still have enough production issues and customer dissatisfaction and downtime. So play it by the ear. There's a number doesn't necessarily mean anything by itself. Static code analysis to detect coding violations. Everybody cares for this. Static code analysis to detect security vulnerabilities. Technically, InfoSec cares about this, but everybody should. Static code analysis to detect memory leaks. This is not something you want to find at the end. So yes, ops. So again, an example of a gate where we have pulled everybody in, and we can pull more people in if you have such a situation, whereby we cannot say that we didn't involve everybody to complete this one task. So some balloons for us, at least for the first bullet, we have a concept of having more than one person or group required to complete one task, which is, let's say, for now, just it's a gate that we are trying to establish. So separation of power is needed for unbiased governance. So this is easier to understand. We did see the US government example, but what baffles me as I move from one enterprise to another, well, who are the powers in the enterprises, right? So we know for sure there's the CEO, but underneath we sometimes have CTOs, CIOs, COOs, operating officers, chief product officer, chief information security officer, and they come by all names, right? And I don't always understand there is no DevOps constitution, there's a US constitution, right? Even, let's say, the luminaries who are in this conference, if they get together and write a DevOps constitution, how will you enforce it? How do you know, the enterprises will actually follow it? Even if they want to follow it, there is just no way to make them follow it. So I can solve this problem. Who are the powers? I don't know. Can we solve another problem? Maybe this is easier. Who should the powers be? So this reminds me of a relay race that the American team was doing, and they got disqualified because they missed passing the baton. And that was so, that was so sad. But this is exactly what we tend to do. We try to go over the wall. We jump over hoops. Like, I feel like circus monkey, like most of my days, because, I have all the best intentions, but I don't think I'm really doing I'm not really doing my job by jumping over these hoops. And there are these people, they go by all kinds of names: release manager, program manager, project manager, who's like telling you what to do. But that doesn't help the situation. If releases were automated, we wouldn't have a title by the name of release manager. So why are you managing a release, right? Like, releases should be boring. So now we have another problem. Architecture should drive the organization. This is the, we have seen Conway's law pretty much in every conference we go to. But if your organization is driving the architecture, you would see that this handoff pattern is being reflected in the design of your software. And that is super unfortunate. Once that happens, it's very, very hard to go back and do architecture should drive organization. But sometimes, does any one person know the whole architecture? Sometimes they don't. So, and this is a legacy hierarchy that people sometimes have for maybe like 10 years. So it's kind of a hard problem. So separation of duties in enterprises sometimes ends up being separation of departments, which it's not. So D is not departments. You should not departmentalize, or maybe should I say compartmentalize, and then say, oh, department A does something and department B is there to say, yes, I approve, or maybe no, I don't. And then A has to go back and fix it and again bring it to B, and then, then the handoff pattern continues. That is not what separation of duties means. Where could the powers be at? Let's try to solve this problem. For those of you who haven't had your eye exam in the last 12 months, this is that reminder, including myself. So, by the way, these diagrams are downloadable from my website, so it really doesn't matter, like if you can't follow everything. But I do want to bring it up one quick second. So, this is probably a little better. What this is really is a model for a pipeline. I won't be able to cover the whole thing. It usually takes a few hours to go from one end to the other, but it divides into phases and how we should go from one phase to another all the way to production. And this is very well, this is best done with a value stream mapping if your company has already done something like that. The value stream mapping contributes in a very significant way. It's the value adding time and the non-value adding time, or what we say the waste. Sometimes companies end up automating the waste because they are in this mood for automating. So we will automate everything that we see. It's all great, but there is waste in that value stream map. Please do not automate it. Just throw it away. And then you'll have a more optimized pipeline, right? So let's go back. So overall, what I'm trying to say is, where could the powers be at? The powers are invariably at pressure points. This is not just in work, right? This is in life too. Wherever you have a power, it means some kind of a pressure is there and some decision needs to be made. So usually when code gets promoted from one stage to another, which means there is a gate, try thinking of a software gate which will open or not open based on some criteria that we will establish right now. That is where the pressure is. So we will think of it in a slightly different manner. Eye exam number 2. So this is another way to look at the pipeline. So we were looking from left to right. Now we are looking from top to down. These diagrams, again, this is available on my website. So pipeline as code, since this is the Jenkins world, it could be done by any other means, by the way. But if you were using a Jenkins file and you're going through all these steps, so unit test, static analysis, linting, security vulnerability, build and publish a versioned artifact, deploy to dev. However, you have built your value stream, run all the tests in parallel, functional performance and security, and let's say whether you will merge to master or not, and this is assuming you have short-lived feature branches. Sometimes you don't need to have short-lived feature branches. You can just go into trunk, which is your master or your main line. Here is a gate, right? Whether you want to or whether you don't want to, and this is where a decision comes in. So if you go through this whole diagram, you will see that some companies require audit trails, change requests to be filed in Jira. Not a problem, because the pipeline can actually do REST calls with Jira and file the change request and poll till a human approves the change request, and the pipeline can just start from there, right? It's a fully automatable problem. It's not even a problem these days. It's very common to do it this way. And then, yes, another parallelization of tests, more gates, and then, more tests in production. And then finally, yes, you can just make sure that you close the change request and you're done, like end to end. So going back to where we were, yes, so the separation of powers is actually the separation of concern. So what is the concern? Where we are placing the gate is where we have a concern, and we want to separate the concerns by saying, oh, the 100 gates project. So this happened when I just walked over to talk to someone, and person was like, oh, are you talking about this 100 gates project? I'm like, oh, is that what you call my project? So it was at least kind of a candid response, right? So I'm like, oh, would you rather go and talk to 100 people and beg for approval? Would that really make your day? Wouldn't you rather have 100 software gates? So. And yes, I mean, people always agree that however many number of software gates you have, they're all programmatic. They usually share code. You build a structure for one gate, the rest of the gates just inherit from there, right? But if you have to go to 100 people instead, it isn't usually what you would like to do. I think we've all been there. So I'm going to simplify the diagram. So that was the last eye exam of this talk. This is way more chewable, I would say, right? But this is also a bit oversimplified. But for this talk, it's fine. What I'm saying is components, like loosely coupled components, get assembled into a subsystem, and then loosely coupled subsystems become a system. By component, I mean the smallest distributable and testable unit, and by subsystem, I mean the smallest deployable and runnable unit, which is essentially, here is where you actually have a running server, and then you subject it to the customer's use cases. And these are the pressure points, as I've been probably trying to do with those arrows, right? This is where a decision is being made, and this is where the concerns have to be separated, because code gets promoted from one stage to another or one phase to another. That's a big deal for a pipeline. So DevSecOps is, I mean, I don't know if you were able to attend the panel. It's very fashionable these days. Now, is it DevOps? Of course it is. Did we change everything? No. It's just we make sure that you don't forget that there's security. Like there was always security, right? But security is now built into the design instead of you building the whole product and then subjecting it to some security test to certify it. That's a different approach. DevSecOps says, pull everything to the left, like pull everything, whatever you had, the whole 9 yards, just keep pulling till everything comes to the left. This diagram was pretty different a few years ago. The biggest circle would actually be in the end. And we know that, right? But we kept pulling till everything came to the front, and we know what those gates should be to make it to the next circle, which again implies promotion, code promotion, or crossing a gate. So unit test, static code analysis, the functional performance. So SAST is the static analysis security testing, dynamic analysis security testing. And so the other thing I have started to work on, this diagram obviously needs to evolve a lot, is when I made these what should I call it, the stages in the Jenkins file when you implement. I've put the tools that should be integrated with the Jenkins file on the left for a Node.js pipeline, which is very typical, a Java pipeline, RDBMS still working on it, Androids and the iOSs, which are the most typical that I found, but this could be Rubies and the Pythons too. So if you go down, if you have the time, you will see all the tools that relate to that particular stage. And if you're really hands-on, like you're doing all the dirty work, these integrations will need to be done, and because these will then contribute to the gates that I'm talking about. I'm not going through the list because I know you can just download this diagram and go through the list yourself. Okay, so we pulled everything to the left. And we know that the separation of powers is now what we are going to address as a separation of concerns, because we couldn't really identify and nail down the powers in an enterprise, which is fine, which is okay. So we separated the concerns with gates and what kind of gates, etc. So now we'll take a deeper look at a gate, which is the internal control we will use to prevent fraud or error. We have some more balloons, but we have a little more to go. So let's say you have a main gate, right? This is what does a main gate consist of? So the pipeline goes and asks the main gate, should I go or should I stop? Main gate says 0 or 1, right? Doesn't get all the details. So 0 for success, and let's say non-zero for failure. It could be Boolean 0 or 1, or you could have non-zero, because sometimes you need to not just say there has been a failure, but you also have to say what kind of failures, how many failures there were, because teams could be interested. But that's a detail. That's an implementation detail, which we could obviously take care of. But the main thing is that there is a main gate, and the main gate is a function of several gates. We will look at that. And then the main gate returns n, the return code of the main gate, which is actually the summation of the return codes of the child gates. What could be the first gate? Performance, sure. To validate the operational excellence. What could be the second gate? Security, sure. So always the return codes are 0 or non-zero, so that they can feed into the main gate. To validate customer use cases, to validate interfaces and network. Now, what you call these tests isn't necessarily the biggest problem. Like, I've been in meetings where the definition of test types was the biggest problem. It really isn't the biggest problem. Like, death by 1,000 test types isn't how we want to die. Whatever is your test type, whatever purpose you're solving with that test type is really not the biggest problem. But the fact that you have built a gate which allows all the parties to play without one person having all the control is where we want to be, right? Because that's what the pipeline needs to know to promote the code from one phase to another. So that would be software gates 1.0, so separation of powers and concerns. So this is very basic. Now, okay. I think I'm doing good on time, so can fool around a little bit, like for 2 minutes. A commit tried to make it to the pipeline. The pipeline was very smart. The commit was buggy. The pipeline caught it, right? And the commit never made it to the bottom of the pipeline. It got caught by an AppSec test. The AppSec test was integrated with the pipeline. Jamaica Farewell was the first ever English song that I learned, like as a kid, and it has stuck with me. I love that song. So the commit's farewell is inspired by the Jamaica Farewell. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It says, like, let's say this is the commit singing, right? So it's down the way where the teens are gay, and I mean happy, like no kidding here. And the sun shines daily on the building top. I took a trip on my pipeline ship. When I came to AppSec, I made a stop. Oh, I'm sad to say I broke the pipe today. It won't be up for many a day. And stage is down and heads are turning around. Explain how it happened in stand-up town. Right. I'm flattered. So that is my first tech poetry, if I may say so. And then, as if that wasn't enough, I knew this would be the last talk of the session, so I actually sang the song and put it on YouTube. But I've always wanted to be a rock star, like a rock singer, but you know how that went. That didn't go very well. So, but yeah, you know, if you get a few minutes, I would appreciate 1 or 2 likes on that YouTube video. I could at least show my husband that I do a decent job of it. Anyway, so right, back to some serious stuff. So SoftwareGates 2.0 is where we want to be, and maybe you are even ahead, right? But the thing is, organization over department. Do not let a single department establish a KPI where they have vested interest. So we've had an example where all the departments had met their KPIs, every single one of them, and yet the organization wasn't doing well. You should, I mean, departmental KPIs are all great, but organizational KPIs is how the business moves forward, is how the C-suite will measure you. If you spend $1 million building this pipeline, there will be a show me the money moment where you will be justifying to the bunch of people, how did you make a return on investment on those $1 million? And this is where a lot of people like us have trouble, because we never establish the KPIs well before we start the project. Do not do this in the middle, do not do this in the end, right? You need to make a baseline before you start the project. So something like, how many deployments were being done on dev, stage, and production? If you were having, let's say, I'm just throwing numbers here, 60%, 30%, 10%. There's no good or bad. It's just what it is. It's the velocity of that Scrum team. Suddenly, you're having this pattern more or less in the first quarter. Then the second quarter, you are having a pattern of, 80%, 20%, 0%. That entire month, you didn't deploy anything to production. So something is wrong. So these are the analytics we want to know about. These KPIs are not departmental. They are just overall a view into the whole world. And if you are following the conference, then there's a new product called DevOps coming out. We obviously want to work with them and make sure these things are reported on their own, right? So dev, stage, and prod isn't anyone's personal property. So this is dev doesn't mean dev owns it, production doesn't mean ops owns it. So you can obviously have some kind of ownership and accountability, but this KPI, what happened in that 4th month when 60, 30, 10 became 80, 20, 0? How did that happen? Maybe there's a legit reason. I'm not saying everybody was in Hawaii. What I'm saying is it raises a valid question to go and find that out. And that doesn't mean go and fire them. No. You have to understand that there must be something going on that you do not know about, right? Failures due to the different categories of gates that you have, that's a good thing to know. If you see all the failures happening in performance, then it is trying to tell you something that, something needs to be done better. Pipeline failures in dev, stage, and prod, that's all good. And there is that number of escape defects that comes in every single conversation that I have with any single enterprise. It's a big deal, right? You spent $1 million in the pipeline, you build those gates, so much of coverage and automation, and yet something was missed. How much of it? Something will be missed. We cannot be 100% perfect, but how much is that of the total percentage that was caught by the pipeline? So this is indirectly telling you the return on investment. Is it good? Is it bad? And if it's bad, there's nothing wrong. It just means you need a few more sprints to get things, get our acts together. Business value per sprint is not the number of releases you did per sprint. The number of releases is you move the bits from point A to point B, which is great. It reflects velocity, but it's definitely not the number of tests executed. You could be executing millions and millions of tests, but it's really what is the business means. Let's say your business is revenue, or business is latency, or the number of new acquisitions you made. So that's the business metric. So per sprint, how much of that do you contribute to? So if you are doubling the number of releases and then losing the business value metric, you will not be able to continue in that business for long. So make sure that the technical metrics are complemented by the business ones. So stability index, function, check-in to go live. I think we did look at this in detail, so I'm going to skip it for now. Code quality, we did look at it. It's like this index fund thing. You put different things inside, different weights optionally, and then involve all the parties, so then later on they cannot say that you did not involve us and that gate opened and you went to the next stage, right? You could be going to production and that's fine, but you need to make sure that you build those gates collaboratively. Check into dev, check into stage, check into go live is check into prods. Essentially this reflects the time, and this is the lead time, the feature lead time. Like check into go live is a subset of feature lead time. Feature lead time is a subset of concept to cash, which is how the whole money thing works. Like if you were with business or marketing, they really care about the concept to cash. So we did a little bit about gates, which is our internal control that we will be using, and we looked at different permutations and combinations, and we won't be able to cover every use case, but at least you get the idea, right? So the last thing we look at is the disseminate tasks and associated privileges for business processes. What is a pipeline? Like now I'm simplifying even further, right? This is your pipeline as code. This is Jenkins file. There is check-in to go live, the metric. There's happy us, we check in, and then something happens, and then cha-ching, like we make some money. And our customers are obviously want to shower us with love, but only if we go that far, right? They can't just, give unconditional love. But if we do make it this far, they give us love, they give us money, and that's where we want to be. But what happens is we keep going up and down, up and down, up and down. But we make it eventually to the right, but we do a lot of ups and downs. And it's business processes, so I'm not going to say that we should not, but that's not the business value, right? So the build server and the artifact repo could be one in the East Coast, one in the West Coast, because somebody just forgot that they interact all the time. Like, why put them on the two opposite ends of the country? So these things have to be discussed with your network, with your, the whoever designed the data center. So pipeline as code, and these make your domain services. So if you heard Kosuke, he says shared services, right? That there is this shared services concept coming from here. So there is a circuit breaker pattern, because if you know one such line is broken, and if you can avoid a failure continually going to that line and continually failing, you can use this circuit to say, oh, hey, just stop doing this for now. I'll let you know when it's back up, and then just keep going. So source code metrics, it's a great thing to put. If you're using Sonar, you would know exactly what this means. So there's a persistence layer behind your static analysis results, so that if there are false positives, you don't necessarily need them to be reported every build, right? You mark them as false positive. You don't need them to come back to you again. But if that's not necessarily the biggest problem, if this line is broken, so have circuit breaker patterns and then just keep moving on. So sharp interfaces, role-based access, etc. Log to dashboard is one such sharp interface. Publish artifact. We are actually just drilling down from the last diagram. Could be like deploy artifact, run some tests, and manage a change request. This would be to Jira. This could be to, I don't know, Cloud Foundry, AWS, Heroku, yeah, you name it, we have it, right? This could, even if you're in the data center, this could be VMs in your data center too. Publish artifacts, you could be on artifact tree, you could be Nexus, you could just be using S3. Log to dashboard, you could be using Elk or the Sumos or whatever it is that your company is using. But you put some anti-corruption there, so that if your company is moving from Elk to Sumo, you don't care, right? You have an established interface with them, which is like, this is the message that I want to be logged, and this is the endpoint. So if you're changing the endpoint, be my guest, but I don't want my pipelines to be down. And the shared services team, they are supposed to keep it up, right? I mean, it's their job to make sure that that it's transparent to you. You don't see the stuff that's changing behind the scenes. A popular thing I've heard is we are a retail company. We can deploy on Thanksgiving, let's say, and then you need to come and check with me if it's a valid deployment date. So then there is another human trying to give you approval. Well, we made a tool, a small utility. It's called a calendar. And then, you say, okay, these are my blackout dates, right? The pipeline, which, this deploy artifact interface, it takes the calendar as a parameter. It knows this is where I should go and check if today's date is a blackout date, and then it doesn't do anything. It waits. It could poll. It could die. Like I really don't care. But what the big picture is, I don't expect a human to make that decision. It is a business decision. I shouldn't be given control to change the calendar. So yes, so that is where the role-based access comes in, right? Whoever has access to that calendar should know exactly what they are doing. I don't have to know. I just have to teach the pipeline to go and make a query and make a decision on everybody's behalf. So that's another kind of separation of concerns. And here we see many kinds of keys to check out code, to write access to, let's say, Artifactory or Nexus, whatever, right? Like write access to wherever you're going, Cloud Foundry or whatever. These keys are all there, except I don't get to see them, that's all. There's a managed credentials. There are many kinds of KMS, key management services, that can keep those keys. I will access those keys, like when I say the pipeline will access those keys, but the pipeline will not be able to edit or change those keys. This is just a quick summary. So I am running out of time. This is a node container label. The person before me did an excellent job of making this. He has an entire talk based on this. So maybe you should just go and listen to that video. But the most important takeaway is, if you have a base image, not everybody needs to check into that base image. The image that imports the base image is maybe what you're changing, but the base image is what you're securing, and that is separation of concerns. So you don't let everybody check into every image. So with credentials will help you. There is good documentation that these folks have provided on how to manage the credentials from the Jenkins file. If you are waiting for input, it's okay if you have a manual gate for asking for approval as a first phase, of course, till you go through all the departments and make sure separation of duties is implemented. Please make sure you time it out, because people sometimes do forget to ever give you approval and the pipeline stays open, right? Still polling, looking for an approval. So please run all the tests in parallel. These are the tests that make the gate. So the gate should not be so long that you even forgot, like, what was the change that I did? So when the gate came back, you have no context anymore. That shouldn't happen. And then the try-catch, if you are required to leave an audit trail, email, Slack, Jira, anything, right? These are DSS built in. You could have an entire channel which has all the trails of what the pipeline did. This is directly from the Jenkins file. So every time you get audited, you have the data, and not everybody should be able to change that data. These are more examples of shared services which the pipelines share. So everybody needs to log to Sumo, let's say. You make a utility out of it, and then a logger. So let's say you're running functional testing SWOT, so the Node pipeline and the iOS pipeline and the Android pipeline all run functional tests on SOS possible. So you can create that secure tunnel through one utility and have everybody share it. Cobertura typically for coverage, and it's okay for all the nodes and the Java pipelines to hit on this. And then that's, in the arguments, you can give the credentials that are needed and where you're expecting the reports and what kind of configuration you want to pass, etc. So it's a wrap. It's 4:30, but it should be 5 o'clock somewhere, so we are good on that. And if you ever come back, this is kind of a high-level summary of what we discussed. You don't need to necessarily, look at it right now, but if ever you don't want to listen to this whole video, but just want the core aspects, this would be it. Thank you very much, and yeah.